No one noticed the woman in the tattered shawl when she walked into the woods before sunrise, but her quiet journey would shake the entire town before the week was over. Her name was Miss Elara Bloom, a teacher no one had hired, a woman no one remembered, and an orphan raised by orphans. She wasn't just poor. She was invisible. Still, every morning, with cracked hands and aching knees, she climbed the hill behind the forgotten orphanage to pick wild berries for children who were not hers, but whom she loved like her own soul. The town had changed. Years ago, it was built on kindness, led by neighbors who shared sugar and shade. But now, it was all iron gates, tinted cars, and eyes that looked away. The new mayor, Claiborne Finch, ran the city like a business. If you didn't profit him, you didn't exist. And so Elara didn't exist. She lived in a broken-down schoolhouse the government had once promised to fix, but never did. It had one classroom, 3 surviving windows, and no roof over the back half. Still, that's where the orphans came, those forgotten children whose names weren't even written on paper. And it was there that Elara made a world with nothing but a piece of chalk, dried leaves, and the strength of her heart. That Monday morning, as thunder growled in the clouds, Elara headed to the woods again. Her dress was wet from the dew, and her basket, woven from rags, swung from her elbow. She whispered thanks to the earth with every berry she plucked. Behind her, the town prepared for the mayor's grand celebration, a festival meant to display his wealth, his new mansion, and a foreign investor who promised to turn the land into a luxury golf estate. But Elara had no idea the path she walked was part of that very land. The mayor had marked it for demolition, not knowing a woman like her even used it, let alone relied on it for food. The children she cared for would lose their home, and she would lose her only purpose. But the ground had its own secrets. Buried beneath the hill where Elara picked berries was something ancient, a spring so pure, so potent, that the town's founders once called it the Spirit's Water. Generations had forgotten it, except Elara. Her grandmother had told her stories before death claimed her early, and Elara remembered. That spring was still alive, still whispering in the roots, still sending up berries richer than any farm could grow. But now bulldozers were coming. As she walked back to the orphanage that day, her basket full, Elara saw the red flags. Wooden stakes driven into the land she loved. Bright paint slashed across trees that had shaded generations of lost souls. She dropped the basket. Her fingers trembled. She was only one woman. No family, no wealth, not even a real salary. But something in her chest refused to let her back down. That night, she stayed up carving names of every orphan she had ever taught into a piece of wood. She set it at the entrance of the woods, a silent protest, a monument of the unseen. She lit a candle beside it, not to scare away darkness, but to call it out. By dawn, the mayor's guards had torn the wood down and stomped out the candle, but they didn't know that someone had seen what happened. A man in a truck with no plates, a stranger, watching from the shadows. And by the end of the week, the entire town would be watching too, especially when the mayor himself would kneel in front of the woman he once ordered removed. The first bulldozer arrived on a Wednesday, coated in fresh yellow paint, its engine loud enough to wake every sleeping bird in the hills. It didn't hesitate. It roared up the winding road toward the Berry Hill, flattening everything beneath its steel. Elara stood by the edge of the orphanage, holding the hands of 2 barefoot girls with ribbons tied from curtain scraps. The forest trembled, not just from machines, but from the weight of a decision made far from the soil it crushed. The mayor had ordered a clearing. His golf course would begin with the hill. No one thought anyone would object. No one expected resistance from a woman who wore patched shoes and fed orphans with her bare hands. But when the bulldozers reached the edge of the marked zone, they found a line of shoes placed in the dirt. Children's shoes. Dozens of them. Worn, broken, muddy. Shoes of orphans who had walked those hills, played under those trees, eaten the berries Elara picked with love. A message made without words but clear as thunder. This land feeds us. The workers hesitated. For a moment, even the bulldozer's engine coughed, unsure. But then the mayor's foreman barked an order, and the machines pushed forward. Elara didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked up the hill, barefoot, and placed her feet in front of the tracks. Her arms were thin, her body trembling, but her eyes were stone. The workers shouted warnings. The engines revved, but no one dared move. Behind her, the orphans came too, silent, barefoot, their palms painted red from berry juice. One child carried a wooden spoon. Another held up a cracked school book. And just like that, the bulldozer stopped. In the mayor's office, rage exploded. How dare a nobody stall his project? How dare a woman who didn't even pay taxes stand in the way of international investors? Claiborne Finch slammed a crystal glass to the floor and ordered her arrest for trespassing, on land she had lived on for 10 years. He didn't care. Power had made him blind. But his assistant, a young man who once sat in Elara's broken classroom before rising through politics, paused. He remembered her voice teaching them poetry through hunger. He remembered her hands wiping his tears when his own mother abandoned him. And something in him broke. That evening, Elara received a letter. Not from the mayor, from the soil. The candle she had lit earlier that week had burned down into the roots of the old tree where she prayed, and there, exposed in the earth, was a small crack. From it, clear water seeped. Not muddy, not rain-fed. A spring. The spirit's water. The same one her grandmother spoke of, known to heal wounds, nourish crops, and once saved an entire village during a drought. She knelt, touched it, and felt the chill of history. This land was sacred. And now she had proof. The next morning, she placed bottles of that water outside every government building in town. No label, just pure glass and clean liquid. No one knew who left them. But rumors spread fast. A sick girl drank it and recovered. A man with ulcers claimed relief. People whispered about a healing spring hidden in the hills. The mayor panicked, not because of superstition, but because the investors were listening. Sacred land could not be touched. Laws protected it. His plan was slipping. Still, pride pushed him forward. He sent more machines, this time with armed guards. But what he didn't expect was a line of townspeople already standing there, led by a quiet teacher with no wealth, but the entire town behind her. And soon, cameras would come too. By sunrise, the hill was no longer silent. Word had spread like wind through dry grass. Townsfolk, once strangers to each other, gathered in mismatched boots and wide-brimmed hats. Grandmothers, farmers, mechanics, street vendors. They didn't come for money. They came because something in them stirred when they heard what was happening. A teacher with no title, standing between steel machines and sacred land. And so they came. Dozens, then hundreds. Not with signs or microphones, but with presence. They stood shoulder to shoulder along the tree line, surrounding the hill like a living wall. In the middle stood Elara, holding a branch of berries like a torch. The mayor, however, was still playing games. He called in media not to show the protest, but to stage his narrative. His men erected banners declaring progress and modernization. They handed out press kits describing the golf course, the luxury spa, and the economic rebirth he claimed would rise from cutting down the forest. Cameras arrived expecting a celebration. Instead, they captured a sea of citizens blocking bulldozers with bare hands. A fragile teacher, barely 5 feet tall, facing off against power with nothing but dirt-stained fingers and faith. A young journalist stepped forward. She was new, sent to cover the event as a minor human interest piece. But when she interviewed the people, when she drank the spring water handed to her by a child, Her heart turned. She canceled the press release and sent footage straight to her agency's main desk. By noon, the town's protest was on national news. Now the mayor couldn't hide. Now the country saw. The headlines read, "Orphaned Teacher Protects Sacred Land, Faces Arrest by Local Officials." The comments exploded with outrage. Messages flooded the mayor's office. Donations poured into Alara's orphanage overnight, more money than she'd ever touched in her life. Still, she didn't touch a coin. She only built a fence around the spring and poured clean water for every child that came. The mayor, red-faced and cornered, lashed out one final time. He declared the protest illegal. He accused Alara of being a fraud, claiming she made up the spring story. He called for her arrest under false trespassing charges, and police arrived with handcuffs. But when they stepped forward, something unexpected happened. A boy stepped in front of her, then another, and another. Soon, 20 orphans stood between the teacher and the cuffs. Then came the townsfolk, one by one, forming a chain. Then, someone else emerged from the crowd. The mayor's assistant. He wasn't holding papers or orders. He held a framed photograph. It showed Alara teaching a group of children on the ground. One of them was him. In a voice firm with memory, he told the cameras that Alara Bloom had educated over 60% of the current public servants in town, not for money, but because no one else would. He called her the soul of the city, the forgotten foundation under its shiny buildings. And then, in front of the entire crowd and media, he turned to the mayor and asked a question that froze the moment in time. "What have you built without destroying something sacred?" There was no answer, only silence. And in that silence, something shifted. The mayor looked around and saw no allies. He would not admit defeat. Yet. But the crack in his armor had started. The mayor didn't sleep that night. The headlines wouldn't stop. The town he thought he owned had turned against him in the blink of an eye. Investors began to pull out quietly, whispering concerns about sacred land, media backlash, and community unrest. Claiborne Finch, once the untouchable figure in polished suits and velvet chairs, was now a symbol of greed crashing against grace. His face was everywhere, but not in celebration, in shame. Alara, meanwhile, returned to the classroom. She didn't gloat. She didn't watch the news. She poured water for the orphans, cleaned their wounds, and taught them from memory. She still wore the same worn dress, still lit the candle beside the tree stump each night. But now the children looked at her differently, not with pity, but with awe. To them, she was no longer just Miss Bloom. She was proof that love without power could still shake the mighty. The mayor tried a final move. A press conference. Flags, lights, cameras, all staged in front of City Hall. He began with forced charm, speaking of unity, development, and misunderstood intentions. But in the middle of his speech, a woman walked in through the back of the crowd. She held nothing but a berry-stained basket. Alara didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was louder than any microphone. And the moment the crowd saw her, they turned, not away from her, but away from him. People began to walk. One by one, they turned their backs on the mayor, stepping down from the plaza to stand behind the woman he tried to silence. A single moment of public rejection, but it echoed like thunder. His speech dissolved, his lips trembled. And then, cameras caught the final blow. His own assistant stepped forward, placed the mayoral pin on the ground, and walked away. The mayor stood alone. That same evening, Alara was invited to the town's main hall, not as a guest, but as a citizen of honor. But she declined. She wasn't interested in awards or titles. Instead, she returned to the hill with the orphans and planted a tree where the spring had surfaced. She named it the Tree of Names. Every leaf a memory of a child once forgotten. But what came next, no one could have predicted. The mayor returned, Not in a car, not in a suit. He came alone, walking through the dirt, shoes covered in mud. The orphans spotted him first and stepped back, but Ilara stood still. She didn't move, she didn't flinch. And then, he dropped to his knees, not out of theater, not out of defeat, but because something inside him had broken. He looked at the ground, the tree, the children. He had forgotten what leadership meant. And in front of cameras that had followed him hoping for drama, he whispered with no microphone, "I came to ask how to begin again." He didn't rise for a long time. And Ilara? She didn't say anything. She simply handed him the same basket she had once carried alone, full of berries, now shared. Rain fell gently the next morning, soft as whispers, soaking the hill in a silver shimmer. But this time the storm didn't bring fear. It brought rebirth. Where bulldozers once stood, saplings now rose from soil touched by hundreds of hands. The town had changed, not through politics, but through people who remembered who they were. The orphaned teacher hadn't just protected a patch of land. She had reminded a broken town of its forgotten soul. The mayor didn't return to his office. He resigned quietly, not as a man in disgrace, but as someone beginning to understand grace. He moved into a small cottage near the woods, and for weeks he didn't show his face, not out of shame, but reflection. And one day, he appeared again, not behind a podium, but in the classroom Ilara had rebuilt with donations she refused to spend on herself. She used it all for the children, new desks, books, clean water, and a kitchen that finally had warmth. When he entered, no one gasped, no one cheered, but Ilara nodded, a small gesture. Enough. The children welcomed him with laughter, not because they knew who he was, but because they had been taught by Ilara to look at hearts, not history. Later that week, the land that once faced demolition was officially declared a protected natural sanctuary. And at its center, a wooden plaque stood beside the spring, etched with words written by the town's elders. Here, where one woman stood alone, we remembered we were many. The media eventually moved on. New headlines rose. But the hill remained. And every morning, Ilara still walked there barefoot, now not alone, but with a growing line of hands helping her pick berries. Children, neighbors, even former strangers who once looked away. Some brought baskets, some brought songs. And every child who drank from the spring knew that it was more than just water. It was memory. Years passed. The orphans grew into adults. Some became doctors, others became teachers. One even ran for mayor, on a platform built not on concrete promises, but on roots. Ilara never left the hill. Even as age took her strength, she walked slowly through the wildflowers, and when her body could no longer carry her, the town carried her instead. On the final morning of her life, they placed her beneath the tree of names, in a chair made from classroom wood. She closed her eyes, smiling, not because she had won, but because she had witnessed something impossible. The world changing not by force, but by love. And when she was gone, the children kept coming. The berries kept growing. The water kept flowing. And the town never forgot the orphaned teacher who picked berries for orphans, until the mayor kneeled before her, and everyone else rose.